Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week is no different. I'm joined with cinematographer Arlene Nelson, whose work includes Seduced, Inside Nexium's Cult, This is Paris, and Demi Lovato, Dancing with the Devil. Welcome to the show, Arlene.
Thank you for having me.
I've got to talk to you about so many things, but Nexium, can you tell me how you got involved with that project? My wife and I watched it as soon as it came out. We were obsessed with, learning about this call. How did you get involved with that project?
The supervising producer and the editor, the supervising editor, I had worked with her on Amazon's Giant Beast, that is the global economy. Cal Penn was the host of that. So she had invited me along. She recommended me to the showrunner.
Oh, interesting. Now, in something like that, like you're dealing with people who've survived a cult, and there's a lot of difficult things that they need to talk about. How do you approach, covering that content and being respectful of the space and putting someone at ease, I guess, in a situation like that?
Yeah, it's always one of those situations where you're absolutely coming into someone's life and asking them to, be vulnerable. And so I definitely like to put people at ease, and just, just make the set sort of a sacred space and have people kind of speak softly and no one walking around urgently, with lights and things, just trying to just sort of do this like ballet of and oftentimes my biggest compliment is when people say that they forgot that there was equipment or cameras in the room, that it just sort of melted away. And I think I tried to be sort of like a magician and just invisible.
Wow. So is there any tricks to helping young people do that? Because I feel like that's I would be very nervous to, like, how can I approach this? What are things to put people at ease?
Yeah. I definitely like to make sure that the director or the producer introduces me beforehand. And so just a little chat, a little meeting beforehand, just to say who I am. And when they walk on set, I try to make sure that they're taken care of. And if someone hadn't brought them a water, I'll always suggest that some water is brought. And I just try to take care of them in a way that some people you can sense they don't want anything, they don't want to talk, and that's fine. Just a little quick introduction, and some people want to talk, so just kind of feel it out. And I ask all the crew to just also just not talk loud and don't move abruptly. Sometimes when someone is sitting in the chair and you have to adjust a light, or people don't realize that there's a human sitting in that chair, and if you're lunging around them, that's especially for someone who might feel already like vulnerable, not to like move around them too quickly. So I think just being aware of that there's another soul that is like being vulnerable, and you just want to make sure that you protect them.
Now, you also have directed documentaries, and you worked on Secrets of Playboy. How did that come about? How did you get involved with that?
So I had directed documentaries way early on in my career. I directed Naked States and Naked World, and they were both on HBO, and they were on The Artist, Spencer Tunick. He takes photographs of nudes in public places. And I did those documentaries for HBO. And so at the time, I was also a cinematographer. And I loved cinematography, and I just sort of stayed in the cinematography lane. And then I had a child, and it just worked that way. And then I just, over the last few years, my daughter is now in college and wanted to sort of get back into the directing lane. And so Alex Dean, the director of This Is Paris, I had worked with her. I was shooting This Is Paris with her. And there were some times where Alex wasn't able to be on set. And so I helped co-direct some of the scenes. I went to the where Paris was a DJ, and so I had directed some of those scenes. And then when Alex called me about Secrets of Playboy, she thought that since it was a 10-part episode series, that it would be a great idea to have a co-director, because there were going to be 54 interviews.
Wow.
Over the course of 5 months. And so I really got in on the ground level with that show, because I also helped to find some of the subjects that we interviewed. I did some of the interviewing. So I truly was a co-director from the research and development phase, which is very exciting.
Now, one of the things that sort of we've seen with the advent of streaming services is this sort of need to put hooks at the end of each episode. How do you, when you're directing, like, I guess, how do you lay out your interviews? Are you looking for that in the interviews, or do you look for that just in post and figure it out in post?
Yeah, I absolutely not looking for it in the interview. I think that would be a distraction, too much pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes there are stories in interviews that are told, and it seems like, oh, that's definitely making it in there. But, ultimately, there's so much footage that doesn't make it in. And so you never know, like, it really, once you have all of the elements and you're weaving them together, then like exactly the story that you're telling. You're just like refining it as you go into the edit, and then you're just casting such a big net in when you're doing an interview.
Well, it makes me think of your Nexium doc that you worked on, because it is very cult-like when we start to see the inside of Playboy. So how did you guys, because that's the delicacy of, like, okay, what information do we hold back to keep audiences excited? Like, I got to see what's happening. Or how did you guys work that out with your editor?
Yeah, I mean, we would have story meetings every day, and especially in pre-production, some of the story meetings would go 2-3 hours. And what we did was, we decided early on, which makes it a little more difficult, was not to tell the story just chronologically, but rather tell it each episode with themes. And so, like, one episode is the girlfriends episode, one is the Playboy bunnies, but always paying attention to the chronology, but not letting that be the arc that pulls you through. It's more like building a case of maybe this wasn't so Shangri-La.
Yeah, well, and that was, it's so interesting, because it's all about perception, right? Like, he's like, we're gonna have a show, I think it was on MTV, I can't remember, but the girlfriends show and the bunnies and everything, but it's like sort of this weird veneer that he creates for himself, which is so fascinating.
Yeah, I think also Hugh Hefner had this uncanny ability to really control the message.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people around him that also helped to control that message and stay on point. And I think that people don't realize that you're not just, and the same with Seduced, you know, with Keith, that he had, you know, people around him that were all enabling this, you know, vision of theirs, this dark vision. People just get caught up in it. And so I think people don't realize when they say, you know, well, why didn't they just leave him? But it's not just a leave him, it's leaving like a whole sort of web that has been created that you get kind of sucked into. Then if you do tell one person in that web that you're leaving, they might convince you not to, then there's another that'll come in. It's not just one person you're dealing with.
Well, that's why I was thinking it reminded me of nexium, because it's like it's so much like that, where it's like it makes you almost dependent on, like, having the girlfriends live in the house makes them dependent on him. So if they are forced to leave at any point, or like choose to leave, they're on their own all of a sudden, and they're like, you know, removed, just like in the cult. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, the whole psychology of it, you know, just the brainwashing that goes on, and how little by little, I think Seduced is such a perfect way to put it, because it really is a seduction and then becomes a nightmare.
Now, what would you say was one of the more challenging scenes for you to, or like interviews for you to do?
So many of them. You know, when you're talking about shame, a person's shame and vulnerability, and you know, it's something that you also have to make sure that at the end of it, that you know, close the circle and let them know that you're there for them. And it's, you know, I think that you're really, again, you're taking someone's, you know, story in the most intimate details and just letting them know that you're going to protect them. So I think that the women that experienced sexual assault, those were the, you know, those were the tough ones.
Well, it's so, with, like, if I was interviewing someone and they were dealing with something like that, like something so traumatic, I would feel this urge to follow up after the interview, see if they're okay, all that stuff. But in documentaries, do you find that there's like, because you also want to stay objective and respectful of the truth and what have you. So do you find, because like when I talk to some filmmakers, they're like, I don't want to be friends with them, I have to stay separate. Do you find that you connect with them afterwards, or how does that work?
I mean, I understand that idea that you don't want to become friends with them so you could be objective, but I think just there's a trust that needs to be built. And, you know, that means several phone calls and emails. And you do start to become, like, Stefan Tettenbaum was Hugh Hefner's personal valet, and his wife Stella was a host up at the mansion. And now every Friday morning, he wishes me a Shabbat Shalom, a happy Shabbat. So, you know, and then it turns out that his son just married a woman who lives down the block from me, just by coincidence. And so every once in a while, he'll drop by and say hello. And it's like, you can't help but Spencer Tunick, I did the documentary with him in 2000, and I just saw him for dinner with his wife in New York. Like, I think that if you're asking so much of someone, like, you in turn give a little too, and or give a lot. But for me, I see that you have to let them know that you're going to be objective and it's going to be brutal for them. But, for me, it does become a relationship.
What is it that gets you when you're looking for a story to direct? What is it that gets you excited about a story or intrigues you, it like wants you to explore it more?
I think I love the investigative process. And so like something with Secrets of Playboy had is that we were scratching at the surface of a story that hadn't been told, but it seemed like there's something more there.
Mhm.
And so I love the idea of just going deeper and finding the link that connects you to the next link. That we started off with a hypothesis, and then little by little we were open. Alex and I were open to the possibility that none of this happened. There was no predators at the Playboy Mansion. Just say. Just say it is all like what you hear. But then little by little you get corroboration. And that's really important. If one person says something, it's not enough. Like you need to hear corroboration. And then once you get the second person comes forward and says the same thing, the third person comes forward. By the time a fourth person comes forward, you pretty much know that you're, onto something and onto a truth that is undeniable.
How do you convince them to come forward? Because like
Mm.
that is I feel like that's a tough sell because it's so personal and shame covered. Like nexium, she was so embarrassed about the scar tattoo and that type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's part of that relationship and trust building, and that's part of the phone calls. And it's ultimately because if it helps other people to hear that they're not alone, if the subject knows that they're not just telling the story for the sake of salaciousness, but that they're telling the story in turn that will help others if they hear this story, then I think that becomes meaningful to the subject and important.
It's interesting because I think about that makes me, I guess, reflect on the Me Too movement because it made it easier for a lot of women to speak out all of a sudden, which is very
Exactly.
fascinating. Yeah.
Exactly. Like once, and Me Too is such a great phrasing because once that like dam is open, it's less scary, having a lot of numbers, unfortunately, but also coming forward, so you don't feel so alone and at fault. That's like another really tough one. Is feeling like it was your fault. And when you hear story after story after story, it goes back to that like corroboration thing. It's like you know that you're not alone. And so I think it's one of those things that just strengthen numbers.
Yeah. What is your next project going to be? If
I
you're allowed to
am,
tell us.
yeah. I meant to ask the showrunner, except there was mention of it in the press, so
Okay.
I think I can say it. I am directing an episode for Gutsy Women, and it is an Apple series, and that's all I'll say.
Okay.
But it's been great, and there also I get to do research and development for the episode, and And that part I love, because you're really constructing the story from the ground up.
Now, I have one last question for you, and I ask this of everyone we interview. A lot of people are stuck indoors because of COVID, and they get out of doors and then they get stuck back in again. And a lot of people have turned to streaming services. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered in the last year that they should check out?
I feel like I should say something nonfiction, because I do love nonfiction, but I've recently just been watching Righteous Gemstones, and season 2 just dropped, and it's Danny McBride, and it not only like does it look great visually, but it's got humor and darkness, and I love dark humor. Dark comedy that looks stylized and great is my thing.
It's a fantastic cast. Like the
Yes.
whole cast is just phenomenal.
Yes.
Like John Goodman, I love in it. So I haven't
So
seen
many
the second
turns, and
yeah,
it's,
I haven't started it yet.
check it out.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Absolutely.
And that's it for today, everyone. Thank you for checking out our show. Make sure to follow us on filmmakeru.com, and of course on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Again, thanks for joining us. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.